And so we're fortunate here to have Dustin Kirkland with us. He's going to be talking about having a good idea is the easy part, a discussion around bringing good ideas to life through product management. A brief bio of Dustin here. Dustin Kirkland is the Chief Product Officer at Apex Clearing. As CPO, Dustin is responsible for defining the vision and evolving strategy of Apex's product portfolio. With 20 years of experience in the software and technology industry, Dustin has worked for some of the largest technology firms, including Google and IBM, along with innovative startups such as Gazang and Canonical. His team of product managers interface with Apex customers and Apex engineers on a daily basis, ensuring quality, excellence, completeness, and timely delivery of product release cycles. Dustin, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, this is a really cool format. I've been incredibly impressed with Patrick and Lisa and the team. We did a podcast a little while back, and I feel like an honorary Chicagoan, at least they've welcomed me into the community.
You're always welcome. As long as you don't put ketchup on your hot dogs and you like deep dish pizza, you're good to go.
I'm good to go in that case. I'm good to go.
All right, good. So our format for this session is going to be a little different. I don't know if you were, we weren't going to put up any slides, or were you going to put up one slide at the beginning? I don't know what.
Oh, I was just an intro slide, and I think you more or less covered it a little bit about the background. So I think we've got a back and forth. I think Jim's going to play Oprah, and I'm going to play Beyonce, and we'll have a fun little conversation here.
I'll do my best. Yes. So before we get started, a little bit of context about Apex Clearing. What do you guys do? How big are you? Tell us so we can put into context like what, your world is like.
Yeah, sure. So we are Apex. We position ourselves as the fintech for fintechs. We provide the back office for many of the trading and investment apps that you might, some of you might use here. We're B2B, so we sell back office financial services technology for buying and selling and trading stocks, funding accounts, opening accounts, stocks, crypto, bonds, mutual funds. It's basically all the same to us. We provide the clearing and custody of those. We are not B2C, so we really don't have, by design, a relationship with the retail investor. Our clients have that relationship. So our clients are the likes of Betterment, SoFi, Webull, Stash, Marcus by Goldman Sachs, a couple hundred companies like that. Many of those are, I think, have laid the groundwork for major disruption in the financial services industry. So we provide the software as a service, the APIs that they use to create those user experiences. Open the account in seconds, fund the account in seconds, start trading in seconds. We provide the clearing and settlement, which has certainly come under the spotlight over the last few months, more recently, and we do it with a very digital focus.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about your background is you have worked in the startups, you have worked for big and small companies, you've worked with some of the biggest tech companies in the world, so you've got a really interesting perspective when it comes to product. And I think one of the questions I'd like to start us off with, and feel free to throw questions in the chat as we continue our dialogue. Product is one of those things where it's like, oh, you want to build a better mousetrap. Do you wait for the world to tell you we need a better mousetrap? Do you come up and say, like, I know what you need, much like, the old Henry Ford quote, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they'd ask for a faster horse. Where does the genesis for good product ideas come from? Is there a pattern? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a couple of different models, and for the 1 in a billion big thinkers like a Henry Ford or a Thomas Edison or Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or something like that, it's definitely a lightning in a bottle situation where you've got an idea that will change the world. And that happens, and we've seen it happen multiple times in our lifetime, which is amazing. It's easy to look back at the light bulb or the automobile and think that kind of disruption doesn't happen anymore. but it does happen. And we've seen it with Apple, with Tesla, and others. I think it's also disingenuous to sort of think that all of us, that every product manager can do that, or can have that kind of an impact. It's awesome to dream big, and I certainly don't want to rain on anyone's parade. This is an innovation summit. That's certainly incredible. Leading an organization, a product management organization, we have to strike a balance between creating that product that no one has asked for, but the entire world will want as soon as we offer it. And there are times and places where we try to do that. There are other times and places where we've got to listen to our customers. We've got to make adjustments or changes to our feature set, our product roadmap, based very directly on what can have immediate impact on the business. So, it's the difference between the near, mid, and the long-term objectives in there. So I'd say you got to strike a balance there. Unless you're that one in a billion type company or individual, it's really hard to capture that, and you've got to have an extremely long time horizon to do that. And that's different than like prioritizing the next set of features that we have to add into the product to have an impact this quarter or this year.
Yeah. One of the really interesting concepts of product that took me a while to get my head around, maybe because I was raised in kind of by post World War II parents that were like, failure is not an option, never give up, never surrender kind of mentality, that like, failure was like not a good word to deal with in our household. Yet, Silicon Valley did a really good job of saying, hey, fail fast, learn and move on. And it makes a lot of sense. How do you know when your product is a dud? Like, how do you know when something's like, we should cut bait on this one?
So I mean, first, to reinforce the concept, I think that's exactly right. I think we've gotten more and more comfortable with admitting our failures. Some of the best Twitter threads I've read recently are, hey, tell me about a time when you failed. We don't talk about that enough. As you and I were prepping for this session, I think it's important to get that out there. In the investment world, if you're investing in stocks or crypto or anything like that, there's a time-tested methodology of sell your losers. Take those losses, count that against your capital gains. It's called tax loss harvesting. It works out in the long run. The math, the models, it works out. There comes a point where it's just better to cut your losses and reinvest in your winners, even at a higher price point, because they're going in the right direction. The others are trending in the wrong direction. And so applying that to product, yes, thank God Silicon Valley has taught us that failing fast is okay. In the last session, the speaker, Catherine, was talking about a reference to innovator's dilemma. I think that's pretty well scienced at this point. From a product perspective, the tricky part is when it takes longer to find the product market fit than you might expect. That is something that it takes a lot of measurement. I'm a scientist at heart, was an engineer before a product manager. Measure everything. The time I spent at Google certainly taught me that. I see one familiar face here. I see Matt Dabari. I think we crossed paths at Google at one point. Good to see you, Matt. There's an element to there's another element to the right products that just aren't the right products at that point in time. And I'd say that I could dig into a couple of experiences in my career where I think we actually had the right product, but we were too early or too late to market. There's a sweet spot in time, in the space-time continuum, when your product hits the market at the right moment. And it's easy to sit back as a third-party observer and look at Robinhood or look at Uber or something like that, just like this global success. And I mean, those concepts aren't all that new. They've been done over and over and over again, right? The same principles behind Robinhood are the principles behind, I don't know, E-Trade in the 1990s, right? Let's make brokerage available for everyone. But boy, hitting it at a point when, this is the format of your stock trading. Uber, right? Uber couldn't have existed before GPS tracking in everyone's phone, both on the summoner's end and the driver's end. It was a great idea. Wouldn't it be? I mean, I'm sure we all were annoyed by calling a cab and how long that took once upon a time. But it took the convergence of massive cloud scale services, maybe deregulation in some cases. So there's a time element. And one thing that I do encourage product managers when doing some mentoring is that when you have the right idea and you have the right product, but the time's not right, definitely consider that dimension of getting it right. And if there's a failure, consider coming back around to that idea at a different point in time. Sometimes it just needs a different catalyst and a different point in history.
Yeah, I actually do want to get to at some point before we finish our session today, maybe a good failure story from you, with specifics. But Adam raised a really interesting question because you were talking about timing, and so you were talking about timing, and the timing might not be right, and he brought up a question that says, you've got customer-driven deadlines, but you've got your agile development needs internally, and maybe some your internal needs for what you want to do strategically. How do you balance and try and get the timing right with product? I mean, that's probably one of the tougher parts of everything.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'd be lying if I didn't throw luck as part. Like, that's one element, hands down. And you can't control that. You can put yourself in the position to be lucky, but sometimes you get the break, sometimes you don't. If you're a poker player, sometimes you get the cards, sometimes you don't. But there's a whole bunch of other things you can control at the poker table besides just the cards that you get. And so I would say recognizing that luck and timing is a factor in timing. That's fine. Put that aside. Let's talk about what you can control. With respect to, and this was actually something I wanted to talk about anyway, with respect to agile methodologies, the ability to recalibrate multiple times is so important. And so one methodology that I learned at one of the companies I worked for a company called Canonical. We made Ubuntu Linux. So it's a great Linux distribution, open source operating system. We did something really different with Ubuntu than Red Hat or any other operating system, Microsoft or Mac for that matter. With Ubuntu, we adopted a time-based release cycle. On time, every time, 6 months, October and April, October and April, October and April. I was there 10 years. We released Ubuntu over 20 times in those 10 years, hit the release date every single time. We always held time as the number one fixed variable. So that was fixed, that was a constant. The size of the team, we also assumed to be constant over the course of a 6-month period. Now, we were always growing and hiring, but we assumed people, the resources was constant. The variable was scope. And so we would scope what we could scope to a release. Now, here we're getting into a little bit of process and as that relates to product management, but I promise if you stay with me, I'm going to tie the two back together. Okay. So we'd scope it and then we'd be off to the races. We'd measure along the way, usually a halfway checkpoint. And so that would give us between the planning and then the halfway checkpoint, and then the next one, the planning and the next checkpoint. It's basically 4 times per year that we got to recalibrate our meters. We got to move some things in, move some things out. Maybe the timing of something just wasn't right, so we put it off, we do it later. Maybe the time was hot now to do something. Let's pull it in and disrupt the plans to some extent, right? Actually, so that you can think of that as a twice-a-year planning cycle. 2 other open source projects I participated in, Kubernetes and OpenStack, were basically quarterly based to some extent. A bit of variability there, but more or less. Those felt more frenetic, just not long enough to really sink your teeth in and get the big things done. Of course, it would happen, but it was always a bit slower and a little more friction. And so at Apex, I sort of split the difference, and we found a really nice balance over the last couple of years following a 3 cycles per year model. 1, 2, 3. We give them numbers, the year 21, and then ABC, 21A, 21B, 21C, and those are our major cycles, milestones. We're software as a service, we're SaaS, we're agile. So within the cycle, teams release and push to production at whatever pace they need to. But from a product and a planning perspective, the commitments we make to clients and customers, to our investors, our stakeholders, we will point at, yeah, we're going to do that in 21C. We're going to do that in 22A. I tell you what, it's going to take us a little bit longer. That's probably a 23A or B timeframe. And it gives us a little bit of flexibility and the ability to put things into bigger long-term buckets, but we meticulously plan a given cycle. And so we do that 3 times a year. And this is one of the lessons learned, that was a major flaw in the previous ways I saw this done. We discount a couple of weeks for holidays over the course of the year. So we have 3 16-week cycles, exactly 16 weeks. 16 plus 16 plus 16 is 48. And then we discount 4 weeks of the year. We just kind of carve that off to the side for Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, 4th of July. We just sort of built that into the plan. We made that mistake over and over and over again, just not accounting for that. And we were always a little disappointed with the output. So a couple of things in there, the ability to recalibrate, look at things. We do that now 3 times a year, plus the mid-cycle check-in about every 8 weeks. That gives us 6 times a year to really look at what we're doing. Are we doing the right thing? Should we move this in or up or out? Should we hire more? Should we outsource this piece? That's given us the ability to make things go a little bit faster when we need to go faster, or delay things out when we need to delay things out.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about, let's say the 3 segments of the year where you've got like an ability to recalibrate, that is basically realignment. You get to align yourself with, whatever competing new priorities are out there, or new needs are out there. So 3 times a year we can make, let's say, this recalibration or this realignment. What are the things that are maybe more fine control, like to maybe get course corrections and alignment, like during those 3 larger periods? Because of course, everything's always changing all the time. I mean, Kubernetes might come out with something that just like changes your priorities all of a sudden. So how do you course correct at a more granular level?
So like in the ideal world, the resources are fungible. The product managers, the technologists, at least in my world, ideally everyone would be fungible, right? So I could plug in, I've got an org of about 60 people. You asked for that early on. What's Apex's size? We're a little over 400. The product management organization is product plus strategic alliances, business development. And then the third part of the org is solutions architects, sales engineers, field engineers, our onboarding, all the technical folks that interface with clients. So all 3 of those roll up into the product, into my organization, the product organization. Ideally, there'd be fungibility across a bunch of those resources. And there are places where we've achieved that. Solutions engineers are more or less plug and play. I've got a rock star set of solutions engineers that can move in one customer and out the other. And we could have developed specialists who only know one product inside and out, only know one client inside and out. And we decided against that. Generalists, they know a little bit about everything, and they're very, very pluggable. We've also achieved that with our business analysts. So our BAs are a group of really sharp junior people, typically a sciencey, mathy, businessy background, that can handle a lot of different tasks. And when one's out or overworked or working on an M&A, some sort of merger and acquisition or something like that, the next one can step in. And so those are 2 places we built from the ground up with that in mind. The places where we haven't quite achieved that is with the product managers themselves. I mean, everybody's got a backup, but product managers tend to have far more expertise that's deeper than it is broad, I guess, for the most part, the team that we have here. And for the most part, the tech teams, engineering teams are kind of structured the same way. There's a set of technologies or a set of APIs that they really know and they're really good at, but we've not yet really achieved a healthy mechanism by which we have a team of 12 that know, I don't know, the cash APIs, and we want them to work on the trading APIs this cycle. That's imperfect. So back to your question, how would we do that on a micro basis? Wouldn't it be great if I could just automatically shift those resources and have them work on something else? The problem is that there's a lot of startup time, right? It's like accelerating an oil tanker. Maybe that's too extreme of an example, but you want to move a big ship. It takes a little while to get up to speed and to slow down and to turn. It's not a speedboat, I'm actually, this would be a place where I'd love to learn from someone else. If someone else has here could share their experience. Do you have a good way of making those micro adjustments and doing it on turning on a dime? How have you achieved that?
I asked the question because I think in my organization, we try to balance like being able to be fluid, but also predictability on what we're delivering to customers. And we do get pressure from customers around deadlines, especially for building something new that doesn't exist yet.
Yep.
And I think turning on a dime leads to chaos. You can handle it for a couple of things here and there, but I just think it should be the exception, not the rule. When it's not the exception, it just creates a lot of churn and a lot of people kind of sitting around waiting for people to figure out what's next and what's going to be done. So we're in the middle of trying to balance right now these long-term 6-month kind of deadline driven big things with just kind of iterating quickly on things we also need to do. And it's challenging to balance that.
Yeah, I can relate to that, Adam, for sure. I can give you a little bit of a perspective as to how we run that process. So we start the beginning of those cycles, those 3 cycles per year. The product managers start the cycle about 4 weeks before the cycle actually begins with engineering. And we call that the prioritization. So the product managers groom the backlog. So we got a backlog of, it's probably 1,000 requests that are well formatted. We use a CUJ format, critical user journey format, who, what, when, why. We don't get into the how. It's a simple entry in a spreadsheet, essentially a database, or we export to a spreadsheet. We groom that backlog, we prioritize it, we score it, we come up with the list. We end up with, for a team of our size, we end up with a list of around 200. It was 197 items we took on last cycle, 21B. We're at 248. We're considering for 21C, which will start in about 3 weeks, in about July. Okay, so we start by taking on those priorities. We map those through a process of product managers working with tech leads and writing PRDs, product requirement documents. We map that list of requirements to the fixed amount of time, 16 weeks, and the fixed amount of resources. That's our couple of hundred engineers, and each product manager does with their engineers. And then we put a stake in the ground at week 1, and we say, these are the commitments. And we, again, spreadsheet. This is just super simple. I've looked at every product. I swear I've tried every product SaaS, a board under the sun. We're back to spreadsheets. Like it works. And I'm done evaluating another third-party product management tool. Okay. So we're back to a spreadsheet. And we've got force ranks, critical, high, medium, low. Then we've got a number value, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The whole number is the major priority, which maps to critical, high, medium, low. And then there's a dotted decimal to the 100th digit, trying to break ties. So 1.01s and 2.35s. It's mainly to know that a 2.35 is slightly higher than the 2.37, 2 items have taken. It's not perfect. I've given up trying to make that perfect. I draw the analogy to building a product roadmap is like driving from New York to LA. There's an infinite number of ways to do it. And you can optimize for speed, for efficiency, for time, for scenic, for beauty, and along the way, there's road bumps and speed traps and accidents and construction. So but there's a bunch of different ways to get from here to there. And that's all we try to do in the prioritization process is end up with a good result. How we get there is fuzzy at best. But we make that commitment, and then we start talking to our clients, especially through our client partners and our internal teams that talk to clients, and we give them a view on these are the things that are coming in 21C. I'm not going to tell you exactly which week they're coming, but roughly in the latter third of the year, or the middle of the year, or the beginning of the year. And that's been good enough. Occasionally we get pressed for, is it going to be done by March 17th? And we can work on that. But generally, clients have been accepting that it's coming in either 22A or 22B, and that's good enough for them to plan around in most cases. So I would say that might help a little bit. Now, inevitably, we end up with what we call late breaking items, and we treat those special. So a late breaking item is something that shows up unexpectedly, we didn't plan for, but we got to take care of. And usually that preempts something else. We almost always have to trade out some other work, which is a short discussion. In my world, a late breaking items emerged on January 27th, 28th, 29th, which were the days around the short squeeze for AMC and GameStop. There was a bunch of stuff that we had to do to handle those volumes, the margin calls. It wasn't like we couldn't have planned it. If we could have planned it, we'd all be billionaires right now, but we couldn't plan it. Earlier last year, and this happens, right? In September of last year, Apple and Tesla both split on the same day. And that was the two most widely held stocks, largest market cap stocks. And we handle splits every day, but never a split that affected, 15 million accounts. And so again, we had to just stop what we were doing and go solve that problem. And our roadmap got adjusted. We did that through a process by which we understood that, hey, these are our plans, but those are going to have to change. So we write a one pager, which is called a scope change document. We moved some things in, we moved some things out, and then boom, we got back to work. And that's not a heavyweight bureaucratic process. It was a matter of a day or two to make those changes. And then, there were some long faces with a customer too about a thing that didn't happen, but not nearly the long faces that would have been involved in a broken set of stock splits or in a failure to handle the incredible volumes that came as Robinhood locked out a bunch of users from being able to trade, and those users opened accounts with our clients, and we had to handle volume that was 100x what it was the day before.
So I don't have a whole lot more questions in the chat, but I do want to get back to, and please, if you have some, speak up or put something in the chat. But Dustin, is there a particular story when it comes to project or product management that kind of like says, gosh, I wish I didn't have to tell this story, or boy, that story really defined my career?
Oh, there's a few that I feel like defined my career. In terms of one that involves some egg on my face. I'll tell you one that we learned a lot about, and it's given me plenty of fodder to teach startups. I do a little bit of advisory work to startups on the side. It's a part-time gig, technical advisor. And the ones that are, within my wheelhouse, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I've been involved in open source since the late 90s, going back to college days. My first job out of college was a kernel programmer at IBM, working on the Linux kernel. Spent some time on site at Red Hat, which was a career-defining moment for me, being staffed on site at the time, a partner of IBM's, and then eventually IBM acquired Red Hat. Or Red Hat acquired IBM. I think that's yet to be seen. Who bought who there. But up until, and then I joined Canonical, which was a direct competitor to Red Hat, and we built out Ubuntu. For years, we tried to build a product around Ubuntu, which was support. We're going to sell support for Ubuntu, and people are going to buy it because A, Ubuntu's better than Red Hat, and B, we'll make it cheaper. So like everyone's going to buy support from us instead of Red Hat, and we're gonna make millions of dollars. And year after year after year went by, and it didn't work out like that. To one extent, we were victims of our own success. If you've used an Ubuntu Linux system, it generally just works. And when it doesn't, you like Google something, you'll find a forum post or a Stack Overflow post, and you're off to the races. And so the idea of selling support was, looking backwards, was just DOA. It was never really gonna work. The other thing is that the freeness of Ubuntu was in direct contrast with our ability to sell a licensed support product around it. And so we've had a losing business model for a very, very long time. I left, went and did a little startup. I was a CTO at a startup where I learned something incredible accidentally. This startup was built around an open source encrypted file system that I had co-authored. I was an advisor to these guys. They were going to take it, put it underneath a MySQL and a Postgres database, and sell basically a turnkey encrypted database solution. That to me was trivial. It was easy to do, but they decided they were going to sell it. And I was an advisor to them, and eventually they raised a VC round, and I joined as a CTO. And we offered that, and the companies knocking on our door across the board were healthcare companies. We got lucky. So back to time, we got lucky. HIPAA had been passed a couple of years before, but was going into enforcement that in 2012, 2013. And we had a bunch of smart technologists at healthcare companies, hospitals, and insurance companies who had to encrypt their data by the end of the year and had to submit and we had a turnkey solution that did that. MySQL, Postgres, Hadoop, Cassandra, Mongo, like all of these were databases where healthcare data was stored. We were able to slide that in underneath. People bought it and bought support for it, not because we sold it to them, because they needed it. And the external driver, the catalyst was regulation. Like there was a regulation that said that this had to happen. And so after that company sold to Cloudera, we did pretty well. I went back to Canonical to run product for Ubuntu, and we created a set of products that were security products that fulfilled regulatory obligations. And those products just sold. The first hit was security updates after the end of life of Ubuntu. If you're around Ubuntu, you know that it's supported for 5 years, and then you have to upgrade. And every time clients would come to us and tell us, hey, can I buy a little bit of extra support? We can't get off of it in time. And usually we would make up a giant number and they'd say, okay, well, never mind. But this time, after I had returned to the role and was running product, we did the math and we were like, hey, if we get, if a company has 1,000 instances and we charge a couple of dollars per instance and we scale that out, and what we'll do is just offer security updates for the core system, how much will that cover? And we were able to do it super profitably. And that product sold itself. It sold itself. Before we'd even launched it, I had commitments from a dozen different companies who bought extended life support. We called it extended security maintenance, ESM. I had a dozen Silicon Valley startups born in the cloud who'd launched and were running hundreds of thousands of instances in Amazon that were on an old version of Ubuntu, and they didn't want to upgrade. And so they started paying us, and they had never paid us a dime before. And I'm talking, we're Chatham House rules, right? So I can say this was Pinterest, this was Etsy, this was Craigslist. Netflix managed to upgrade, but they were running Ubuntu at scale, and so they didn't need this product. But a bunch of others, they were on Ubuntu 12.04, which was launched in 2012. It expired, support expired in 2017, and we started selling them security updates in 2018, 2019, 2020, and that product has been evergreen ever since. Every 2 years, another Ubuntu comes out. Every 2 years, another Ubuntu expires, and every 2 years, there's another tranche of instances where people start buying security. And so we stumbled into that one. The big mistake was everyone's going to buy support. No one bought support. But what we found out was people would buy security updates. They were required to. There were regulations that said that they had to have that.
So we're getting up probably towards the end. I think we're heading back to the main session at about 12:35. So it's 12:32 right now. I don't see any further questions out there in the chat room, but if you got one, raise your hand or speak up. But I would love to kind of get, your perspective, Dustin, with the time we've got left. It seems as though a lot of people view product as like product engineering, and they don't see the enormity of the whole aspect that there's like business models that need to be figured out with regard to product. You know, do you find that a lot of people look at product as like just the creation of a thing that someone else spec'd out, and like perhaps not always really focusing on the business model?
Yeah, I'd say quite the opposite, Jim. Depending on who's asking what of product, we're asked to be the sort of do everything superhero, from, you know, prototype design, write some of the code, demo it, but also run the spreadsheet, build the model, what's the ROI, and then get out and market it. Especially if you're in a startup, you're going to do all of those. Get out and talk about it to journalists, analysts, podcasts, whatever it might be. In fact, all three of those are on my, when I'm interviewing a product manager, I'm usually evaluating them to be able to tick all three boxes to some extent, you know, measure on each of those rubrics. And usually I'm looking for someone who's got a pretty good balance across those, right? The engineering part is relatively easy for someone who's got a background in engineering. Maybe they got a degree or two in computer science or information services. Maybe they spent a decade writing code or something else. For others, that's something that they have to leg into and learn a little bit about. The second piece would be the business aspect. Again, some come to it very naturally. Maybe they've got an MBA. Maybe they've been a business analyst. For others, that's a learning gap. And then the third piece is to some extent personality driven, right? The extroverts who like to speak and write and talk, that'll come a little more naturally than others. On the flip side, some of the you know, more introspective folks are much better at the writing and the presentation skills. So I always look at it as sort of three legs to that stool for good product management. It's a bit of engineering, a bit of the businessy sales mindsets and business savvy, and then a little bit of the, you know, the marketing panache.